I'm Sierra, 32 years old, and I just got the most unexpected phone call from my Aunt Lisa, my dad's sister. We haven't spoken in 15 years. She wants me to attend my grandfather's 70th birthday celebration, the same grandfather who rejected me when a DNA test suggested I might not be my father's biological daughter. The memories flood back, leaving me breathless. If you're watching this, let me know where you're from and what you would do in my situation. Like and subscribe if you've ever had to rebuild your life after family betrayal. Growing up, I truly believed I had the perfect family. My dad, Thomas, was a structural engineer who designed bridges and buildings across New England. He had this calm, methodical approach to everything in life. My mom, Elaine, taught fourth grade at the local elementary school, the same school I attended. She was warm and creative, bringing that same energy home with handmade decorations for every holiday and birthday. My younger brother, Travis, completed our family 4 years younger than me, and always following me around like a shadow. We lived in a cozy 2-story house in a suburb outside Boston, Massachusetts. It wasn't fancy, but it was filled with love. The kitchen had these awful yellow countertops from the 70s that Mom always talked about replacing, but never did. Our backyard wasn't huge, but it had an old maple tree with a swing that Dad hung when I was 5. I spent countless hours on that swing pumping my legs until I felt like I could touch the clouds. Family gatherings were always at our house or at my grandparents' place about 30 minutes away. My dad was close with his parents, Andrew and Margaret, and his younger sister, Lisa. We saw them at least twice a month for Sunday dinners. Those gatherings were filled with laughter, good food, and endless conversations that would stretch late into the evening. Every summer, we'd rent the same cabin on a lake in Maine for 2 weeks. The cabin was nothing special, just a rustic wooden structure with a screened porch and direct access to the water. But those vacations hold some of my happiest childhood memories. Dad would teach Travis and me how to fish, and we'd spend hours out on the small rowboat. Mom would read novels on the dock, occasionally looking up to wave at us. At night, we'd build bonfires and roast marshmallows under the stars. Thanksgiving was always at my grandparents' house. Grandma Margaret made the best apple pie I've ever tasted, and Grandpa Andrew would carve the turkey with surgical precision. The house would be filled with aunts, uncles, and cousins from both sides of the family. I was especially close to my grandfather, Andrew. He was a retired mathematics professor, and he recognized my love for numbers early on. When I was 8, he started giving me math puzzles to solve, gradually increasing the difficulty as I grew older. He'd beam with pride when I figured them out. Everyone said I was my father's daughter through and through. We shared the same analytical mind, the same love for puzzles and problem solving. Dad would bring home brain teasers from work, and we'd compete to see who could solve them first. I inherited his artistic side, too. We'd spend weekends sketching buildings or landscapes together. He taught me about perspective and shading when I was just 9 years old. Physically, though, I looked more like my mom. We both had this bright auburn hair that seemed to catch fire in the sunlight. Our skin was fair, with a generous sprinkling of freckles across our noses and cheeks. Mom and I both burned easily in the summer sun, unlike Dad and Travis, who tanned to a golden brown. Mom's eyes were green like mine, while Dad and Travis had deep brown eyes. These genetic quirks never seemed important to anyone. We were a family connected by love more than anything else. My cousin Natalie was the daughter of Aunt Lisa and Uncle Paul. She was only 6 months younger than me, and we were inseparable during family gatherings. We'd share secrets, make up elaborate games, and plan our futures together. Natalie dreamed of becoming a veterinarian, while I wanted to be an architect like my dad. We'd spend hours designing a joint practice where she would treat animals and I would design pet-friendly homes. Looking back, I realized there was always some tension between my mom and Aunt Lisa. They were polite to each other, but there was an undercurrent of something I couldn't quite identify as a child. Sometimes I'd overhear snippets of arguments between them, usually ending when they noticed me nearby. Mom would paste on a smile and suggest I go find Natalie, while Lisa would purse her lips and walk away. I never understood what caused this friction, but it was a small cloud in an otherwise sunny childhood. My 16th birthday was perhaps the last perfect family memory I have. Dad had spent weeks secretly planning a surprise party. He'd coordinated with my friends and extended family to create a celebration I'll never forget. The backyard was transformed with strings of lights, and a small tent was set up in case of rain. Everyone I loved was there, from school friends to distant relatives. My grandparents gave particularly emotional speeches about how proud they were of the young woman I was becoming. The highlight of the evening was when Grandma Margaret presented me with a family heirloom, a delicate silver bracelet with small sapphires that had belonged to her mother. "This has passed down through the women in our family for 4 generations," she told me, clasping it around my wrist. "Now it's yours to cherish, and one day pass on to your daughter." I felt so connected to my family history in that moment, so secure in my place within this loving circle of relatives. I had no idea that in less than a year, everything would change. The first subtle shift in my perfect family life came shortly after I turned 17. I had been experiencing unusual fatigue and recurring headaches for several months. After multiple doctor visits, my pediatrician suggested some genetic testing to rule out a hereditary condition that ran in my dad's family. There was a history of a rare blood disorder on his side, and the doctor wanted to be thorough. It seemed like a routine precaution at the time, nothing that would upend our lives. The testing process was simple enough. Mom, Dad and I all had blood drawn at the hospital. Travis was tested too, though his symptoms were different from mine. We were told the results would take a few weeks to come back. None of us thought much about it after leaving the hospital. Life continued as normal, with school activities and family dinners filling our days. When the results finally arrived, I was at debate team practice after school. I came home to find the atmosphere in our house completely transformed. Mom was sitting at the kitchen table, her eyes red and swollen from crying. Dad was standing by the window, his back rigid with tension. They stopped talking the moment I walked in, exchanging a look I couldn't interpret. "What's wrong?" I asked, dropping my backpack on the floor. "Is it the test results? Do I have something serious?" Mom reached for my hand. "No, sweetheart, you're perfectly healthy. There's no blood disorder." The relief I felt evaporated quickly when Dad turned around. The look on his face wasn't relief, but cold anger, something I'd never seen directed at me or Mom before. "Why don't you go to your room, Sierra? Your mother and I need to talk," he said, his voice unnaturally controlled. Later that night, I heard them arguing. Their voices carried through the heating vents between my parents' bedroom and mine, a quirk of our old house that had allowed me to eavesdrop on many conversations over the years. "The test has to be wrong, Thomas," Mom was saying, her voice cracking with emotion. "Tests like this don't lie, Elaine," Dad responded coldly. "The genetic markers don't match. There's almost no possibility that she's mine." "I never cheated on you. Never." "There has to be another explanation." "Like what? Immaculate Conception? Stop lying to me. Who was it? Someone from the school? One of our friends?" Their argument continued well into the night, with Mom repeatedly denying any infidelity and Dad refusing to believe her. I lay in bed, my mind struggling to process what I'd heard. The test had somehow suggested I wasn't my father's biological daughter. It seemed impossible, like a plot from one of the soap operas my grandmother watched. The next morning, breakfast was a silent, tense affair. Dad left for work without kissing Mom goodbye, something I'd never seen before. He barely looked at me, mumbling a response when I asked about his day ahead. Mom seemed distracted and exhausted, dark circles under her reddened eyes. Over the next few weeks, the tension only grew. Dad started working later and later, sometimes not coming home until after dinner. When he was home, he was distant, especially with me. The easy conversations we used to have about math problems or art projects disappeared. He would answer direct questions politely but briefly, then find a reason to leave the room. Mom tried to maintain an air of normalcy, but I could see the strain taking its toll. She lost weight, and her usually immaculate classroom planning fell behind. One night, I found her crying in the laundry room, clutching one of Dad's shirts to her chest. When she saw me, she quickly wiped her tears and claimed she had allergies, but we both knew it was a lie. The strain at home was affecting my schoolwork. My grades began to slip, particularly in math, a subject I'd always excelled in. My teachers noticed the change and asked if everything was all right at home. I lied and said everything was fine, too embarrassed and confused to explain what was happening. The real heartbreak came when the situation spread beyond our immediate family. Dad had apparently confided in his sister Lisa, who then told their parents. The next Sunday dinner at my grandparents' house was excruciating. Grandpa Andrew, who had always treated me with such warmth and pride, was noticeably distant. He directed most of his conversation to Travis and barely acknowledged my attempts to discuss a new math concept I'd learned. Grandma Margaret tried to be kinder, but there was pity in her eyes when she looked at me as if I had suddenly become someone to feel sorry for, rather than the beloved granddaughter I'd always been. Aunt Lisa was the worst, barely concealing her triumph at what she seemed to view as my mother's fall from grace. She kept making pointed comments about real family and blood ties throughout dinner. My cousin Natalie, once my closest ally in the extended family, now avoided me. I caught her whispering with another cousin and looking in my direction, stopping abruptly when they noticed me watching. At school, I learned that Natalie had been telling people that I wasn't really her cousin, that there was a scandal in the family. Small-town gossip travels fast, and soon I was aware of subtle changes in how some of my classmates treated me. I tried multiple times to talk to my dad directly about what was happening. One evening, I knocked on his home office door, where he had taken to spending most of his time at home. "Dad, can we talk?" I asked, poking my head in tentatively. He looked up from his computer, his expression guarded. "I'm busy right now, Sierra. Maybe later." "It's important. It's about the test results." A flash of something pain-anger I couldn't tell crossed his face. "I don't think there's anything to discuss." "But there is. I'm still me. I'm still the same person I was before that stupid test. Why is everyone treating me differently? Why are you treating me differently?" Dad rubbed his temples, not meeting my eyes. "It's complicated, Sierra. Adult situations sometimes are. Now please, I have a deadline." That dismissal hurt more than an outright argument would have. My father, who had always made time for me no matter how busy he was, couldn't even look me in the eye anymore. It was as if 17 years of father-daughter love had been erased by a single piece of paper. Aunt Lisa became the most vocal family member in rejecting me. At a family gathering for my uncle's birthday, I overheard her telling a distant relative, "It's just so hard to know that someone who isn't really family has been part of our lives for so long. Poor Thomas is devastated. And to think all these years Elaine has been lying to everyone." The worst part was that no one contradicted her. Not my grandparents, not my other aunts and uncles. It was as if overnight I had become an imposter in my own family story. My high school graduation should have been one of the happiest days of my life. Instead, it marked one of the final steps in my family's complete fracturing. Despite maintaining solid grades through the turmoil at home, my heart wasn't in the celebration. The auditorium was filled with proud parents and extended families cheering for their graduates. But when my name was called, only my mother and brother stood up. The seats I'd saved for my dad and my grandparents remained empty. Mom tried to compensate for their absence, cheering extra loudly and taking dozens of pictures. Travis, only 13, but already understanding the gravity of the situation, stood tall beside her, clapping enthusiastically for his big sister. But I couldn't help scanning the crowd foolishly, hoping that my dad might have slipped in at the last minute that he wouldn't actually miss this milestone. After the ceremony, as families gathered outside for photos and congratulations, I noticed a few of my classmates looking at me with pity. My friend Jessica's mother awkwardly offered to include me in their family photos when she noticed my small family group. The kindness of strangers somehow made the rejection of my own family even more painful. 2 weeks after graduation, my father insisted on another DNA test, this time at a different lab. He claimed the first one could have been contaminated or mixed up with another patient's. Mom agreed immediately, desperate to prove her faithfulness and restore our family. I went along with it, though by this point I was becoming numb to the whole situation. The second test results came back with similarly inconclusive findings. While not definitively ruling out paternity, they indicated a lower probability than would be expected for a biological father and daughter. The report included technical language about genetic markers and probability factors that I couldn't fully understand, but the impact was clear from my father's face when he read the results. That evening, he packed several suitcases and moved out of our house. "I can't live with this lie anymore," he told my mother as I listened from the staircase. "I've filed for divorce. You'll be hearing from my lawyer." Mom collapsed to her knees in the hallway after he left, sobbing so hard I feared she might make herself sick. Travis ran to his room and slammed the door, the sound echoing through our suddenly emptier house. I sat with Mom on the floor, holding her, while she cried, feeling like I should be the strong one, even though I was breaking inside. The divorce proceedings were ugly. Dad accused Mom of adultery using the DNA tests as evidence. Mom maintained her innocence but had no way to prove it. The courtroom became a battleground where my very existence was debated as evidence of my mother's supposed infidelity. I stopped attending the hearings after the first one, unable to bear being the center of such painful scrutiny. With Dad gone, the rest of his family completed their rejection of me. Grandpa Andrew called one afternoon asking to speak to my mother. His voice was formal, lacking the warmth that had characterized our relationship my entire life. "Elaine, I'll be stopping by tomorrow to collect Margaret's bracelet," he said. "It's a family heirloom, and it should stay in the family." Mom put her hand over the receiver and looked at me questioningly. The bracelet had been my 16th birthday present, a symbol of my place in the family lineage. Now they wanted it back, erasing even that connection. I nodded, tears streaming down my face. Fighting over a piece of jewelry seemed pointless when we'd already lost something far more precious. The Christmas after the separation was particularly painful. For the first time, Mom, Travis, and I weren't invited to the traditional family celebration at my grandparents' house. Instead, we had a small, subdued dinner at home, attempting to maintain some holiday spirit for Travis's sake. I tried to start new traditions, making homemade ornaments and baking cookies, but the absence of our extended family hung over us like a shadow. A few days after Christmas, I was at the mall with Mom shopping for winter boots when I spotted my dad and Natalie at the food court. They were laughing over pretzels, looking carefree and happy. When Dad saw us, his smile vanished. He quickly paid for their food and ushered Natalie away in the opposite direction, deliberately avoiding us. Natalie glanced back, once her expression a mixture of guilt and curiosity, before disappearing into the crowd with my father. The rejection hit Mom particularly hard. She began seeing a therapist twice a week, diagnosed with depression and anxiety. There were days when she couldn't get out of bed, when the simple act of making breakfast for Travis seemed beyond her capabilities. I took on more responsibilities at home, helping Travis with homework, making sure bills were paid, and keeping our household functioning as best I could. My plans to attend college that fall were put on hold. The savings my parents had set aside for my education were tied up in the divorce proceedings, and Mom needed my help both financially and emotionally. I found a job as a barista at a local coffee shop, working early mornings before coming home to help with Travis and the household. In the evenings, I took classes at the community college, trying to keep my educational goals alive, even as they were delayed. The final breaking point came nearly a year after Dad moved out. Grandpa Andrew was hospitalized briefly for a minor procedure, and I went to visit him hoping that illness might soften his stance toward me. When I arrived at his hospital room with flowers, he was awake and alert watching television. His face hardened when he saw me. "What are you doing here?" he asked, muting the TV. "I heard you were in the hospital. I wanted to make sure you were okay." I held out the flowers awkwardly. He didn't take them. "I appreciate the gesture, Sierra, but I think it's best if you leave. This is a family matter." The words cut deep, but I made one last attempt. "Grandpa, I am family. I'm still the same person I've always been." He shook his head, his expression resolute. "No, you're not. The test results make that clear. Thomas isn't your father, which means I'm not your grandfather. It's a biological fact, and no amount of wishing will change that. I think it would be best for everyone if you accepted that and moved on." I left the flowers on a chair by the door and walked out, not looking back. That was the last time I spoke to my grandfather for 10 years. The fresh start in Arizona didn't feel like a fresh start at first. It felt like exile. Mom, Travis, and I moved into a small apartment in Phoenix, far from the only home I'd ever known. We chose Arizona partly because Mom had a college friend there who helped her find a teaching position, and partly because we needed to be somewhere completely different, somewhere without memories or familiar faces. Our first apartment was nothing like our house in Massachusetts. It was a 2-bedroom unit in a complex with thin walls and a small community pool that was always too crowded to enjoy. Travis and I shared a room separated by a bookshelf we positioned as a makeshift wall. At 17, Travis was angry about leaving his friends and school behind, and he initially blamed me for the family's disintegration. "If you weren't born, none of this would have happened," he told me during one particularly heated argument. The moment the words left his mouth, I could see he regretted them, but they hung in the air between us, impossible to take back. Money was extremely tight. Dad paid the court-mandated child support for Travis, but it wasn't enough to cover all our expenses. Mom's new teaching job paid less than her position in Massachusetts, and the medical bills from her therapy sessions added up quickly. I continued working at a coffee shop, transferring to a branch of the same chain in Phoenix. My community college credits transferred, but I could only afford to take 1 or 2 classes at a time. The worst part of those early days was watching Mom struggle. Her depression had deepened after the move. She would go to work, maintain a cheerful facade for her students, and then come home and collapse into bed. There were nights when I would sit outside her bedroom door, listening to her cry, feeling helpless to ease her pain. Travis and I became her caretakers in many ways, reminding her to eat, encouraging her to join us for short walks around the neighborhood, making sure she took her medication. My one bright spot came in the form of Jenna, a co-worker at the coffee shop. She was a few years older than me, working full-time while pursuing a degree in social work. We were scheduled for the same early morning shifts, arriving at 4:30 a.m. to prepare for opening. In those quiet pre-dawn hours, we developed a friendship that would become my lifeline. "You seem like you're carrying the weight of the world," she observed one morning after watching me mechanically restock the pastry case. "Want to talk about it over breakfast after our shift?" At a small diner later that day, the whole story poured out of me. It was the first time I'd told anyone outside my immediate family about the DNA test, the rejection, the divorce, the move. Jenna listened without interrupting, passing tissues when needed, but otherwise just giving me space to unload the burden I'd been carrying. When I finished, expecting pity or awkward platitudes, she surprised me. "You know, I run a support group for people who've experienced family estrangement. You might find it helpful to talk to others who understand what you're going through." The support group met weekly in a community center downtown. The first time I attended, I sat silently in the back, just listening. There were people of all ages there, grandparents cut off from grandchildren, adult children estranged from parents, siblings who no longer spoke. Each story was different, but the pain of rejection was universal. Over time, I began to share my own experience, finding unexpected relief in the simple act of being heard and understood by people who didn't judge. After 2 years in Arizona, things began to improve. I received a scholarship that allowed me to transfer to the state university to study psychology. The program resonated with me in ways I hadn't anticipated. Learning about family systems, attachment theory, and the psychological impact of rejection gave me a framework for understanding my own experience. I found myself excelling in my classes, developing a particular interest in trauma and recovery. Mom gradually emerged from her depression. Her therapist adjusted her medication, and she began practicing mindfulness and yoga. She made friends with other teachers at her school, and occasionally even went out for social events. Watching her rebuild her life gave me hope that healing was possible even after devastating loss. Travis and I repaired our relationship too. He apologized for blaming me for the family's problems, and we developed a closer bond than we'd had before. He joined the high school track team and discovered a natural talent for distance running. I attended every meet I could, cheering from the sidelines with a pride that felt almost maternal. In my junior year of college, I met Daniel in an art therapy elective I was taking. He was an architecture student with a quiet confidence and gentle humor that drew me in immediately. We started as study partners, then friends, before acknowledging the growing attraction between us. I was cautious about dating, fearful of rejection and abandonment, but Daniel was patient. When I finally told him about my family situation on a long walk through a desert botanical garden, his response was simple but profound. "Family is more than genetics," he said. "It's about who chooses to love you, who stays when things get hard. And Sierra, I choose you." That choice to see me as worthy of love regardless of my family drama was revolutionary. Daniel introduced me to his parents, who welcomed me warmly. His mother, Barbara, made a point of including me in family gatherings, seemingly understanding, without being told that I was starved for that sense of belonging. His father, James, shared his interest in architecture with me, showing me his collection of design books and taking me to see notable buildings in the area. Slowly, I began to build a new understanding of family. The support group friends, Jenna, Daniel, and his parents, my professors, who took an interest in my academic development, all became part of a chosen family that filled the void left by those who had rejected me. I started to believe that perhaps the loss of my father's family wasn't a reflection of my worth, but of their limitations. The healing process wasn't linear. There were still nights when I'd wake up from dreams of my grandfather's rejection, or days when seeing a father and daughter together would trigger a wave of grief so intense I'd have to find a private place to cry. But I was learning techniques to manage these moments, journaling, meditation, grounding exercises from my psychology studies. Each day I was rebuilding myself piece by piece into someone stronger than before. 4 years after our move to Arizona, I was preparing for my college graduation. I had completed my bachelor's degree in psychology with honors and had been accepted into a master's program with a focus on family therapy. The irony wasn't lost on me that my family trauma had shaped my professional interests, but I had come to see it as transforming pain into purpose. The graduation ceremony was approaching when Travis called me with news that shattered the fragile peace I'd constructed. "Dad's been in a car accident," he said, his voice tight with worry. "He's in the hospital in Boston. It's serious, Sierra." The world seemed to tilt under me. Despite everything, hearing that my father was injured awakened feelings I thought I'd resolved. "How bad?" I managed to ask. "Multiple fractures, internal bleeding. He's stable now, but it was touch and go for a while." Travis paused. "Grandpa Andrew called Mom to tell us. He thought we should know." "Are you going back?" I asked. "I think I should. Whatever happened between him and us, he's still my dad." The question hung in the air between us. Would I go too? I spent the night pacing my apartment, wrestling with the decision. Part of me wanted to rush to his bedside to see if a near-death experience had softened his heart toward me. Another part, the protective part that had grown strong through years of therapy and healing, warned against exposing myself to further rejection. In the end, I decided not to go. I called Mom, who supported my decision. "You have to protect your peace, Sierra," she said. "You've worked too hard to rebuild your life." Travis flew to Boston the next day. I threw myself into graduation preparations and tried not to obsessively check my phone for updates. 3 days later, Travis called with news that would upend my understanding of the past decade of my life. "Sierra, you need to sit down for this," he said, his voice a mixture of emotions I couldn't quite identify. I perched on the edge of my bed, heart racing. "What is it? Is Dad worse?" "No, it's not that. It's about the DNA tests from all those years ago." He took a deep breath. "They were wrong, Sierra. You are Dad's biological daughter. 100%. The room seemed to spin around me. "What? How is that possible?" "There were 2 tests. When Dad was admitted, they did a full panel of blood work and genetic testing for treatment purposes. A doctor noticed some unusual markers and ordered more specific testing. Dad has a rare genetic condition called chimerism." I struggled to process this information. "What does that mean?" "Basically, he has 2 distinct sets of DNA in his body. He absorbed a twin in utero very early in development, and he has some cells with his DNA and some with his unborn twins. The blood samples taken for the paternity tests years ago came primarily from the cells with the twins' DNA, which is why they showed a negative match with you. But the new tests looking at multiple tissue samples confirm that you are absolutely his biological daughter." I couldn't speak. The implications of this revelation crashed over me in waves. 10 years of rejection pain and rebuilding my life, all based on a medical anomaly, a fluke of biology that could have been discovered if anyone had investigated further instead of jumping to the worst conclusions. "Sierra, are you there?" Travis's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Does Dad know?" I finally managed to ask. "Yes, the doctors explained everything to him yesterday." And I held my breath, waiting for Travis to tell me that Dad wanted to see me, that he was filled with remorse, that he was desperate to make amends. "He's processing it. He hasn't said much." Travis's hesitation told me everything I needed to know. Even with irrefutable proof that I was his biological daughter, my father wasn't rushing to reconcile. I hung up shortly after, then collapsed onto my bedroom floor, sobbing with a grief that felt brand new and ancient at the same time. Daniel found me there hours later, still crying, and held me while I told him what Travis had discovered. "It wasn't enough that I was the same person who loved him for 17 years, I said through tears. My worth to him was only ever about biology, and even now that the biology confirms I'm his, he still can't bring himself to reach out to me." In desperation, I called my father's hospital room the next day. A nurse answered and put him on after I identified myself as his daughter. "Hello?" His voice was weak, but unmistakably his. I hadn't heard it in so many years that the sound alone brought fresh tears to my eyes. "Dad, it's Sierra. I heard about your accident and the test results. How are you feeling?" There was a long pause. "I'm recovering," he finally said, his tone formal and distant. "Dad Travis told me about the chimerism, about how the original tests were wrong. I'm really your daughter. I always was." I couldn't keep the pleading note out of my voice. Another pause, longer this time. "Sierra, this isn't a good time. I'm very tired, and the doctors say I need rest." "When would be a good time to talk about the fact that you and your entire family rejected me for something that wasn't true?" The words burst out before I could stop them. "I can't do this right now." His voice was strained. "Maybe once I'm out of the hospital. I need to think." The line went dead. He had hung up on me. The finality of that click sent me into a tailspin. For days afterward, I could barely function. I missed classes, called in sick to my part-time research position, and stopped answering texts from friends. The revelation that should have vindicated me, that should have restored my place in my family, had instead opened a wound I thought had long since scarred over. Daniel became my rock during this period. He brought me food when I couldn't motivate myself to cook, sat with me through crying jags that would strike without warning, and never once suggested that I should just get over it or move on. He understood that I was grieving not just the rejection I'd experienced, but the fantasy I'd held on to that someday, somehow, the truth would emerge and my family would welcome me back with open arms. My therapist helped me work through the complex emotions the new information triggered. "What you're experiencing is an identity crisis," she explained. "For years, you've built a narrative around being rejected for not being your father's biological child. Now that narrative has been upended, but the rejection remains. You're having to integrate this new information into your understanding of yourself and your family." She was right. I had come to terms with the idea that I wasn't biologically related to my father, had even found some peace in the knowledge that his rejection said more about him than about me. Now I had to face the even more painful truth: my father and his family had rejected me, even though I was his biological child all along. The problem had never been my DNA. It was their conditional love. 3 years passed. I completed my master's degree and began working as a counselor at a family therapy center in Phoenix. My specialty became helping clients navigate family estrangement and build new support networks. I poured my personal experience into my professional practice, finding meaning in helping others through situations similar to my own. Daniel and I married in a small ceremony in a desert botanical garden. Mom, who had blossomed into her new life in Arizona, walked me down the aisle. Travis, now a college graduate himself, working for a tech company in California, stood as Daniel's best man. Jenna was my maid of honor, and the small gathering of guests consisted mainly of friends we'd made in our years in Arizona. None of my father's family attended, though I had sent invitations more out of a sense of closure than expectation. Our wedding was nothing like the elaborate celebration I'd dreamed of as a young girl, with extended family filling church pews and generations of traditions being honored. Instead, it was intimate and personal, filled with people who had chosen to be in our lives, rather than those connected by bloodlines alone. Daniel's parents embraced me as a daughter, helping with wedding preparations and hosting a beautiful rehearsal dinner. "Family isn't just blood," Barbara told me as she helped me with my veil on the wedding day. "It's who shows up, who stays, who loves without conditions. We're so happy you're becoming part of ours, officially, though you've been family to us for years already." In the months after our wedding, I started a blog about my experiences. I didn't use real names or specific locations, but I chronicled my journey from rejection to rebuilding. What began as personal therapy quickly gained readers. Comments poured in from people sharing their own stories of family estrangement, asking for advice, or simply expressing gratitude for feeling less alone in their struggles. "Your words gave me the courage to set boundaries with toxic family members," one reader wrote. "For years, I thought I had to maintain relationships that hurt me because blood is thicker than water. But your blog helped me see that I deserve respect and love." The blog led to speaking opportunities at local support groups, then at regional psychology conferences. I found myself becoming an advocate for a different understanding of family, one based on mutual respect, emotional safety, and unconditional love, rather than mere genetic connections. Each time I shared my story publicly, the sting of rejection faded, a little more transformed into purpose. As my professional reputation grew, I was invited to be interviewed on a popular podcast about family dynamics. The episode, titled "Redefining Family Beyond Blood Ties," was downloaded over 1 million times. My inbox filled with messages from listeners who resonated with my experience. I've been estranged from my parents for 20 years, wrote one woman in her 60s. For decades, I've carried shame about this, as if the estrangement was proof of my failure as a daughter. Your interview helped me see that sometimes walking away is an act of self-preservation, not selfishness. The growing community around my work became yet another form of chosen family. I started hosting virtual support groups for people navigating family estrangement, creating a safe space for sharing experiences and coping strategies. In many ways, the rejection that had once devastated me had become the foundation for my life's work. Daniel and I purchased our first home, a modest 3-bedroom house, with a yard big enough for the garden I'd always wanted to plant. Mom, who had been dating a kind widower named Jack for the past year, moved to a retirement community nearby. Having her close allowed us to rebuild our mother-daughter relationship now, as adults who had weathered tremendous challenges together and emerged stronger. Travis remained our bridge to the past. He had chosen to maintain relationships with both sides of the family, visiting Dad and our grandparents in Massachusetts several times a year, while staying in regular contact with Mom and me. I never asked him to choose sides, understanding that his relationship with our father was his own to navigate. During one of our weekly phone calls, Travis mentioned that our grandfather Andrew's health was declining. "He's not the same Sierra. His memory is starting to go, and physically he's much frailer. Last time I visited, he actually asked about you." My heart skipped a beat. What did he say? He was looking at old family photos and saw one with you in it. He stared at it for a long time and then said, "I think we made a terrible mistake with Sierra." He seemed genuinely sad. I didn't know how to respond to this information. Part of me wanted to dismiss it as too little too late. Another part wondered if there might still be a chance for some form of reconciliation, not to rebuild the relationship as it was, but to find closure before it was too late. "Did Dad say anything?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Travis sighed. "He changed the subject. I think he still struggles with the whole situation. Pride, guilt, shame. It's a complicated mix." I let the subject drop, but my grandfather's words stayed with me. "I think we made a terrible mistake." It wasn't an apology, but it was the first acknowledgement from anyone in that part of my family that what had happened to me was wrong. The call from Aunt Lisa came on an ordinary Tuesday morning. I was reviewing client notes in my home office when my phone rang with an unfamiliar Massachusetts number. Curious, I answered. "Sierra, it's your Aunt Lisa." The voice transported me instantly back 15 years to family gatherings and whispered gossip, to rejection and pain. My heart raced, and I considered hanging up, but professional curiosity won out. "Hello, Lisa." I deliberately omitted the aunt, a small but significant boundary. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." Her voice was tentative, lacking the confidence I remembered. "I'm calling because your grandfather is turning 70 next month. We're having a family celebration, and he asked specifically for you to be invited." The words hit me like a physical blow. After 15 years of silence, this was how they reached out. Not with an apology, not with an acknowledgement of the pain they'd caused, but with an invitation, as if nothing had happened. "Why now?" I asked, my voice steady despite the emotions churning inside me. Lisa sighed. "He's been having health problems. His memory isn't what it used to be, but he's been talking about you a lot lately. About regrets. I think he wants to make peace before." She trailed off, but the implication was clear. "I'll need to think about it," I said finally. "This isn't a simple decision for me." "Of course." There was a pause. "Sierra, for what it's worth, I'm sorry. We all are. What happened wasn't fair to you." The apology, so long awaited yet so insufficient, brought tears to my eyes. "Thank you for calling, Lisa. I'll let you know my decision." After hanging up, I sat at my desk, overwhelmed by conflicting emotions. Part of me wanted to reject the invitation outright to protect myself from potential new hurt. Another part was curious, wondering if reconciliation might offer healing I hadn't been able to find on my own. The therapist in me recognized this as an opportunity for closure, while the wounded child within still craved validation from the family that had discarded her. I needed perspective, so I called the people who had become my true support system. Daniel listened without interrupting as I explained the situation, then offered his thoughtful take. "Whatever you decide, I'll support you completely," he said. "But ask yourself, what do you hope to gain from seeing them again? And are you prepared for the possibility that it might not give you what you're looking for?" Mom was more cautious. "They hurt you deeply, Sierra. They hurt both of us. If you go with your eyes open. Don't expect them to be different people than they were 15 years ago." Travis was supportive of the idea. "Grandpa really does ask about you. I think he genuinely regrets what happened. Dad is harder to read, but he might surprise you." My therapist helped me work through the decision methodically. "There's no right or wrong choice here," she reminded me. "The question is, what serves your healing best right now, not what anyone else thinks you should do." Jenna, who had seen me at my lowest after the family rejection, offered practical advice. "If you go, have an exit strategy. Drive yourself, book your own hotel room, know exactly how you'll leave if things become too difficult." After days of consideration, I made my decision. I would attend my grandfather's birthday celebration, but on my own terms. I wrote a careful email to Lisa outlining my boundaries. I would come for the main event, but would stay in a hotel, not at anyone's home. Daniel would accompany me. I would leave if I felt uncomfortable at any point. Most importantly, I wasn't coming to pretend the past hadn't happened, or to resume relationships as if 15 years of silence could be erased in an evening. The day of the party arrived. Daniel and I flew to Boston, rented a car, and checked into a hotel near my grandparents' home. As I dressed for the event, I looked at myself in the mirror, hardly recognizing the confident woman who stared back at me. At 32, I was so different from the devastated 17-year-old who had been cast out of this family. I was a professional with a purpose, surrounded by genuine love, secure in my worth, regardless of anyone else's validation. My grandparents' house looked smaller than I remembered, though little else had changed. The same neatly trimmed hedges, the same rocking chairs on the porch, the same brass knocker on the front door. Daniel squeezed my hand as we approached, grounding me in the present moment. Lisa opened the door, looking older and more subdued than in my memories. "You came," she said, genuine surprise in her voice. "And you must be Daniel. Please come in." The living room was filled with familiar faces that had aged 15 years since I'd last seen them. Conversations quieted as we entered, all eyes turning toward us. I spotted my father standing near the fireplace, his hair now gray at the temples, lines etched more deeply around his eyes. Our gazes met briefly before he looked away. My grandfather sat in his favorite armchair, frailer than I remembered, but with the same penetrating gaze. When he saw me, his eyes widened and filled with tears. "Sierra," he said, his voice cracking. "My girl, you came." I approached him slowly, aware of the silent audience watching our reunion. "Hello, Grandpa," I said, my voice steady despite the emotions threatening to overwhelm me. He reached for my hand with trembling fingers. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "So sorry. We were wrong. I was wrong." The simple acknowledgement so long withheld broke something open inside me. I knelt beside his chair as tears streamed down my face. Not tears of joy or forgiveness necessarily, but of release. The validation I had craved for so long had finally come, though at a cost I would never have chosen to pay. The party continued awkwardly around us. Some relatives approached to greet me, offering stilted apologies or commenting on how well I looked. Others kept their distance, perhaps uncertain how to bridge the 15-year gap, or unwilling to acknowledge their role in my exclusion. My father remained on the periphery, watching, but not approaching. When dinner was announced, he finally made his way to where Daniel and I stood.
"Sierra,"
He said formally, extending his hand as if I were a business acquaintance rather than his daughter. I looked at his outstretched hand, then at his face, the face that had once been the center of my world. "Dad," I acknowledged briefly, taking his hand.
"You look well."
He said stiffly.
"I am well,"
I replied. "This is my husband, Daniel." Dad nodded at Daniel, but didn't offer his hand.
"Congratulations on your marriage. Travis mentioned it."
The conversation stalled heavy with all that remained unsaid. Finally, Dad cleared his throat.
"We should join the others for dinner."
Throughout the meal, I observed the family dynamics with the detached interest of the therapist I had become. The tensions between various family members, the alliances, the unspoken hierarchies, all were visible to my trained eye, in a way they hadn't been when I was younger. I recognized patterns of communication that explained so much about how my situation had been handled 15 years ago. After the birthday cake was served, Lisa clinked her glass for attention. "Grandpa Andrew has asked Sierra to say a few words," she announced, causing a ripple of surprise through the gathering. All eyes turned to me expectantly. I hadn't prepared for this moment, but as I stood, I knew exactly what needed to be said. Daniel gave my hand a reassuring squeeze as I faced the family that had once defined and then rejected me. 15 years ago, a medical anomaly led to a misunderstanding that tore our family apart. I began, my voice clear and steady. A simple DNA test couldn't capture the complexity of human genetics, and in the rush to judgment, relationships that should have been unbreakable were severed. I looked around the room, meeting eyes that had once looked at me with love, then suspicion, then rejection. I didn't come here today to cast blame or to dwell on the past. I came because life is too short for unresolved endings. I came to honor the relationship I once had with my grandfather, whatever time remains. Taking a deep breath, I continued. The past 15 years have taught me that family isn't defined by genetics alone. It's defined by who stands by you when the world falls apart. Who believes in you when evidence seems to suggest otherwise. Who loves you not for what you can prove, but for who you are. I glanced at my father, who was staring intently at his plate. I've built a life filled with purpose and surrounded by people who love me unconditionally. I don't come seeking to reclaim my place in this family. I've learned that my worth isn't dependent on your acceptance. Turning to my grandfather, I softened my tone. Grandpa, I forgive you, not because you deserve forgiveness, but because holding on to resentment only hurts me. I've carried the weight of this rejection for too long, and today I'm setting it down. The room was silent when I finished. My grandfather's eyes were filled with tears, and several others were discreetly wiping their eyes. My father still wouldn't look at me. His jaw tight with emotion, he seemed unwilling to express. After the party, as Daniel and I prepared to leave, my cousins approached one by one to reconnect, to apologize, to express regret for years of silence. Aunt Lisa hugged me tightly, whispering, "We were so wrong," into my ear. My grandmother pressed a small box into my hand, the silver bracelet that had been taken back all those years ago. My father remained distant, nodding a formal goodbye from across the room. Whatever healing might be possible between us clearly wouldn't happen that day. Perhaps it never would. And for the first time, I found I could accept that possibility without it diminishing my sense of self. As Daniel and I drove away from my grandparents' house that evening, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because everything was resolved, not because the family that had rejected me had suddenly transformed, but because I had finally truly accepted that my value didn't depend on their recognition of it.
Are you okay?
Daniel asked, glancing over at me. I smiled, watching the familiar streets of my childhood recede in the side mirror. Yes, I said, and meant it. I really am. 2 months after the party, I discovered I was pregnant with our first child. As I placed my hand on my still flat stomach, I made a silent promise to the new life growing within me. This child would never question their place in our family. They would be loved, unconditionally valued for exactly who they were, not for who we expected them to be. The chain of conditional love that had marked my father's family would end with me. Family is more than DNA. It's a choice we make every day in how we treat the people we claim to love. I chose to build my family on a foundation of acceptance, honesty, and unconditional love. In doing so, I found the healing that no DNA test or family reunion could ever provide. If you've ever experienced family rejection or estrangement, know that you're not alone. Your worth isn't determined by those who couldn't see your value. Build your circle with people who choose you every day, who stay when things get hard, who love you without conditions or tests to pass. Share your experiences in the comments below. Subscribe if my story resonated with you. And remember that sometimes the family we create matters more than the family we're born into. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I wish you healing on yours.